Let me just tell you, the US Supreme Court has ruled against Donald Trump's global tariffs enacted back in April under federal law meant for national emergencies. These are the pictures live from the Supreme Court. We've been expecting that ruling for a number of weeks and it's been held back and held back. It has just emerged and it is significant because Donald Trump has lost. And of course, you will remember that tariffs have been his go-to policy, his weapon he has used so many times. It started, you will remember, back in April, what he described as Liberation Day, when he announced the whole sweeping range of tariffs for all sorts of countries with a basic baseline of 10%. You'll remember the pictures from the Rose Garden in the White House where Donald Trump was there with his blackboard and a variety of figures for different countries in terms of the tariffs announced. And one remembers at the time a baseline of 10%. Then over the days it became clear, the European Union, for example, 20%, Japan 24%, India 26%. The United Kingdom at that stage 10%, but some of the highest tariffs, Cambodia, that was 49%, and other countries where it just was significantly higher. China, of course, the central focus for Donald Trump. At different stages, that ratcheted up to over 100% as you had tariffs and then counter tariffs announced by Beijing that continued to ratchet up until it was cooled down. These are the pictures, you'll remember them from April, where the president had the list of countries and went through them. Now, it is really significant because a number of announcements were made. Some, a very narrow amount of tariffs, the steel tariffs, for example, he did apparently have the power to do that. All the rest were being tested by the Supreme Court, and that is where he has failed. And that, of course, has huge amounts of ramifications because it begs the question, what happens now? Only about, a month ago, 6 weeks ago, in anticipation of this ruling, Donald Trump posted a long post on Truth Social, which ended with, if the Supreme Court rules against us, the country is screwed. That's what he said at the time, because it opens the door to all sorts of questions about should the monies raised by tariffs now be returned? What happens to the legality of what has been done so far? Where does that leave all those companies that have changed the way they export to the US because of those tariffs? Where does it actually leave Donald Trump with the use of that weapon? We've seen at different stages Donald Trump impose tariffs when he's not liked the policies that countries are actually carrying out. So one remembers when it came to the issue and the debate and the controversy around Greenland, suddenly the president slapping on extra tariffs to European countries. That never got implemented, but it was the weapon that he continued to go back to. And the same was true about Brazil and the former President Bolsonaro around his trial. So it is the weapon that Donald Trump has consistently used in this, the second term, and the US Supreme Court ruling against Donald Trump's global tariffs. So it is a significant ruling. I just want to quickly take you to the markets boards to see if there's any particular reaction there. And of course, it's only been open, 35 minutes, still up. So we shall see if there is movement on that board. But it is a significant moment that the Supreme Court that has looked at this, it looked at it, I think, initially about 2 to 3 months ago. It has held back its ruling. There's been a little amount of back and forth with the White House. But today we have the ruling, and I'll just repeat it for anyone joining us. The US Supreme Court ruling against Donald Trump's global tariffs enacted under a federal law meant for national emergencies. And of course, the point has been made that at no stage did Donald Trump go back to Congress, say, look, this is the situation. I want to implement tariffs and go through Congress. He bypassed Congress. These were just moves made from the White House and the Supreme Court ruling against that. In a moment, I'll talk to Justin Wolfers. He has talked to me so many times along the way, Professor of Economics, when we've talked tariffs in the past. I think the line has been established to him, so let's bring him in to the conversation. Justin, great to have you in quick time. Your initial reaction to this breaking development?
Huge big news. Mate, I'm not a lawyer. I can't tell you what should have happened, but I can tell you that the Emergency Powers Act doesn't use the word tariff. The Constitution gives the right to tariffs and all taxes to Congress. This decision doesn't say you can't issue tariffs. It says the president has to go through Congress to do it. So it's all about the unilateral power of our king over here. I think what you're going to see very quickly is a very positive reaction from global markets. That's markets telling you that the president's signature policy that he fought so hard for to help American businesses, markets believe it hurts American businesses.
That's really interesting because we were showing the markets board and they were still up. So you would expect a positive response from the markets, not a negative one. I'll touch on that in a moment in more detail. But in terms of the fallout, because Donald Trump, I mentioned it, I don't know if you heard me saying it, there was that long post a few weeks ago where he ended saying the problems it would cause the US if this decision went against him, and I've cleaned up the language he used, but he was talking about it costing trillions of dollars to the US. Potentially, could it? Justin, I don't know if
I lost you, Matthew?
I think you have lost me temporarily. I was just making the point that in one of the posts recently, Donald Trump said if this ruling went against him, it would cost the US trillions of dollars. Do you think that is realistically what we potentially could be looking at?
No, mate, this is silly. So first of all, what you've got there is a bloke who doesn't know the difference between billions and trillions. He hasn't raised trillions. And secondly, this is just a bloke who doesn't like permission. If he wants tariffs, it's really easy. You ask Congress to pass a law. Turns out it's a Republican-controlled Congress. If it's such a good idea, all he's got to do is have the argument with his own party and win it. If he can't do that, you've got to think it's a pretty bad argument.
A final quick question to you before I bring in Gary O'Donoghue, our correspondent. What happens to all those firms, countries that have been paying the tariffs if there's not a way of actually getting this through Congress to get to the same point we're at now? Are they entitled to try and ask for that money back?
Right. So first of all, countries don't pay tariffs. I want to be really clear on that. Who has paid tariffs is the American companies who brought it in. Now, the decision is about that thick, and I went straight from it being released to talking to you, so I haven't had a chance to dig into that. But that's one of the big questions is, will people be eligible to get refunds for what happened so far? But I want to hit you just with one big point. What if we had a trade war potentially caused much of the world's economy, including the United States, to go down the toilet, and all along the whole darn thing turned out to be unconstitutional and illegal? Wow, what a day and what a world we're in.
Justin, hopefully I'll come back to you in a moment or two, but I want to bring in Gary O'Donoghue, who's there in our Washington office. And Gary, give me your snapshot assessment in terms of the significance of what we've just heard.
One of the biggest cases of either of Donald Trump's terms for him to lose in the Supreme Court, no question. Most certainly the biggest economic case. Tariffs are a pillar, a central pillar of not just his economic policy, but his foreign policy, his outlook on the world. But I will say this, in recent times, when he's been asked about this case, he's not really put a lot of store by winning it. He's always said, actually, oh, we'll just find a different way of doing it. And, you know, there are tariffs that can be imposed under different parts of the legislation, national security legislation. Some of those aluminium and steel tariffs are already imposed under a different provision in the US code that has been challenged in the court, but not really overturned in any sense. He's managed to keep those. So he may try and do some of that, just reclassify these as national security issues and do it that way. But in the short term, you've got to remember that over this last calendar year, 2025, the tariffs brought in somewhere in the region of $280 billion. That was a $200 billion rise on 2024, the year before. So that's a lot of money, and that's got into, improving the position in the deficit, et cetera, et cetera. So that is a big hole that they will feel. And you're right to say that, there will be importers, there may be foreign companies, there may be, consumer groups even, who may feel, do you know what, we'd like a bit of our money back. So this could spawn a whole load of more court cases in the coming months.
Politically, though, Gary, you watch the president every day, and Justin touched upon it. We are likely to get a reaction from him because the one thing he absolutely hates from any quarter is to be reined in, to be told no.
That's right. And of course, the majority on this case, I mean, I haven't really read any of the case, but the majority is 6-3 against the president. And that's, of course, in normal times, that's the Conservative majority he has on the Supreme Court. And it's gone against him this time, and he won't like it. And of course, what they say about the Supreme Court, it's not fallible because it's not final because it's infallible. It's infallible because it's final. There's nowhere to go from here in terms of challenging this, and they will have to comply if they want to be within the law. So we'll see what his reaction is. I'm sure he'll have plenty to say for it. But I'm pretty sure they've got a plan B for this, because if you go back to the oral arguments in the autumn and you listen to the tone of the questioning from people like Amy Barrett and Neil Gorsuch and others, it was pretty hostile to the government's case. So I think they may have seen this coming.
Gary, thanks very much. Let's try to go to Michelle Fleury, who is in New York, monitoring what we were showing you a short while ago, which was the markets board. Michelle, it's still pretty early. It's only, 5-10 minutes since this news broke. But it was interesting listening to Justin. He was anticipating that actually the markets might respond really favourably because there was so much uncertainty into upending the rules as we've done over the last, 8, 9, 10 months.
I mean, I think if you listen, Matthew, to what the administration has been saying, whether it's figures like Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, whether it's the Trade Ambassador Jameson Greer, all along they've said they have other tools at their disposal. They will have been looking into those for many months now because this case has been rolling on for quite a while through various courts all the way to the Supreme Court. And so in some ways, the fact that you have this very clear-cut decision that a large part of Donald Trump's trade agenda effectively has been sort of ruled, against. Now that kind of allows everyone to move forward and to assume that the White House will then focus on other measures, whether it's things like 232, 302. These are other types of kind of measures under which the administration can impose tariffs. And so, I was looking at the markets just now. Right now, the S&P 500, the Nasdaq are both up, the Dow down slightly. So it gives you a sense of sort of how much markets were expecting this. I think for businesses, this also provides some clarity. Remember, they are the ones, in some cases, who've been paying these higher import prices for goods coming into America. Now they have some clarity, but I say only some because, of course, there is a lot left unclear, which is if they want to get repayment for some of the tariffs they've already paid, that process is not sort of altogether clear from this ruling.
Michelle, when I was talking to Justin Wolfers, and we'll go back to him in a moment or two, he mentioned the steel tariffs, because here in the UK, that was one of the big things that immediately had an impact. Now, some of the tariffs, a lot of the tariffs, the majority of the tariffs are under this Supreme Court ruling, but not all of them. So take us through the distinction. What did the president have the legal capacity to do, and what didn't he have the legal capacity to do?
So this goes back to Liberation Day. If you recall, back in April, we saw the big sort of showy announcement on the Rose Garden, outside the Rose Garden. There was the posters with the kind of list of country-by-country tariffs. I think we're showing those pictures there of reciprocal tariffs. So the reciprocal tariffs that were imposed on many countries around the world, those are struck down by this. Essentially, this opinion says that he didn't have the authority to impose them. The other ones are the 25% tariffs on Mexico, Canada and China. Remember, those were imposed because of their alleged role in fentanyl and how that was being brought into the United States. So those were imposed using this law. Those are all gone as a result of this, or those have been sort of struck down by this opinion. What still remains are things like steel and tariffs. What is still coming down the pipeline are things on, for example, the pharmaceutical industry. And there, like I say, it is those types of sector-specific tariffs that the administration could turn to. And so I think for international viewers watching this, for governments around the world that have done trade deals, because remember, that was part of what this was all about in the first place. Those reciprocal tariffs on countries around the world was designed as leverage to try and sort of secure better trade agreements between the US and other countries. And I think there's been some, 20+ agreements that have been signed since April. The question now is, what does that do for those? Because some of those rely on these tariffs as leverage. And if that's gone, you know, how binding are these trade agreements? Bearing in mind that the administration can find alternatives, will countries stick to the terms they previously agreed?